Let's talk about getting unconcussed. There are a lot of people that have concussions, and not just people from athletic activities. Lots of different injuries occur to people where they get concussions in their head. Mine happened because of an automobile accident I was involved in. And as I was hit by the car and thrown and I tumbled onto the ground, my head got beat up pretty bad. And at that time, many years ago, they didn't really analyze people or diagnose them with concussions. So they just said my head was bruised. What I knew was that my head was incredibly sensitive, particularly on the left-hand side, to touch. And there's some other unusual phenomena that let you know that I identified a year later that meant that I was concussed. You get very sensitive to light. That's one of the things. Another thing is that your anger trigger is way up. So people could do something that's very kind of innocuous, and all of a sudden you're triggered, and you can be quite angry, actually. There are incredible stories about football players and being concussed, and it goes in a very wrong direction when they get that angry from their concussions. I didn't personally go that far with it, but the concussion showed up for me as more of an immediate memory loss and an inability to remember. There was physiological distress in my body. My gut had problems. You must know that concussions are a disease to the brain. It's not just like a bruise to your elbow or a biomechanical distress. You now have a disease in your head. And because it's in your head, it kind of messes with you very differently than it would be if it was, say, in your stomach, if you had a stomach ache or an intestinal problem or a heart problem. It's not so obvious, actually. What is very obvious is that because it's created a problem in your gut, you do feel somewhat frantic about your health. That's an issue that goes on with people. There's things associated with the lack of balance and directional confusion and orientation in space and thinking your arm's one place when it's someplace else. There's all these very confusing neurological conditions that result when you damage the brain. So then that happened to me many years ago, and then when I figured out to naturally contract muscles when I stretch them, what I discovered was that when I stretch muscle groups on the back of my shoulder or in the front of my chest, that the muscles on the back of my shoulder would affect the movement of the plates in my head. So when you get a concussion, it's essentially like your plates get crammed together and the brain gets bruised inside. And then what happens is that you don't have the same amount of space inside. So you need that increase in space. And the way to do that is that if you stretch out these muscles or have them stretched out, muscle groups on the back of your shoulder associated with your small intestine, or get assisted that way, they actually get your plates to move. And when they move, it feels like a bee sting is happening in those sutures, particularly around the ear area for myself. And when that happens, immediately, you feel like you have a bigger skull for your brain to be in. And then all of a sudden you get whole blocks of memory increasing. And then you get to be more smart in a particular way that you haven't been able to think. For me, after my accident, I couldn't remember telephone numbers. There was just no way. And if I stopped somebody when I was driving and asked them for directions, and they told me, I couldn't remember. There was no way that was going to happen. And immediately when I started changing these, taking out the dense fascia and scar tissue out of the back of my neck and shoulder and having help from other people doing that, all of a sudden my ability to think, I got smarter. And I kept getting smarter and smarter, which is a great feeling. And then when I figured out muscle groups on the front of my chest were affecting my circulation to my brain, it then started healing my brain faster because of the increased circulation and lymphatic flow to my brain. I've met many people that have had concussions from a lot of different, whether it was from soccer or from an accident or from a trauma that occurred to them. And no matter who they were, and no matter the nature of that trauma that caused that concussion, the moment you started removing that dense fascia and scar tissue from the back of the shoulder and from the front of the chest, they started healing from their concussions. It's a very big topic right now because of concussions are up in the medical world and on the people's mind. And particularly about parents and their children and playing sports and not wanting their kids to get concussed and stuff. So we really need to kind of deal with this. And there's a natural way to deal with it again. When you have these scar tissue removed, your balance increases, you get smarter, your gut starts to heal, you are not triggered by anger, you find yourself more loving and more capable of receiving love. It brings you out of these kind of extreme near-death kind of experiences that create these traumas to the head. I would like everybody to know that they can heal from their concussions, that it's not a life sentence, and that there is a way to do it. And I'm hoping this introduced you to that concept. Let's see if you can't embrace that idea that you can heal from your concussions and start to do something about it. Have a great time.